Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the Cyber Gizmo, what my plan is to talk a little bit about Devuan and then talk about setting up a migration strategy to move from Debian 13 over to Devuan. I finally got my hands on it, and I've been waiting for it because it has a newer kernel that allows me to use newer hardware that I've got sitting here that I want to be able to put into production. Now, could I do that with Debian 13? Absolutely. What does Devuan really bring to the table? Well, Devuan basically just takes systemd out. The rest of it is Debian. But it gives you three choices for what you want for PID 1. Do you want system5 init, which is the original manager for services? Or do you want OpenRC? Or do you want the newer run it? I went with system5 init because it's familiar to me. It's not nostalgia for me. I just want something that works. I don't care what it is. I think the real question is with Devuan is whether or not a real-world system can make the jump, and is it easy enough to be able to deploy real systems and do real work? This journey started way back in May. When I was still running Debian 12, I put up Devuan 5 on two machines. One of the machines was on a VM and the other one was on hardware. And so why would I do that? Well, I want to, VMs are great for a lot of things because you can stand them up quickly. You can do testing with it. You don't have to worry about altering hardware because once you alter hardware, you end up having to clean it off at some point. But a VM you can just throw away, build a new one, and just keep going. These machines are also hardened. So those could present special problems for a systemd-less distribution because when you're dealing with systems like fail to ban and even unattended upgrades for that matter, may have API calls that are hardwired to systemd. I need to find out if I migrate, first of all, I've got to migrate the Devuan 5 over to Devuan 6. That's step one. Step two is I have to migrate Debian 13 over to Devuan 6. I stood up a test, and the test I'm going to do is I'm going to create 4 virtual machines. One is Devuan 5 with a CLI interface. Devuan 5 with XFCE. Now, why XFCE? Debian 13, same thing. A CLI version of Debian 13 and a XFCE version of Debian 13. Now, if you read through their online documentation, they have very good instructions for installing it clean on a new machine, and they also have documentation for migrating from Devuan 5 to 6 and from Debian 13 to Devuan 6. So read them over first before you get started. There are some things in there you're going to want to be aware of. Had no problems with the Devuan 5 migration on CLI. It just worked. Also, Devuan 5 XFCE just worked. No problem. Debian 13 on XFCE just worked. But Debian CLI, it was minor, though it was not a big deal. And systemd creates these device names called predictable names. You'll see them. They're things like ENP2S0 or ENS18 or ENO1. You might see them as the WLP1. Linux, on the other hand, the internal hardware names are things like ETH0, ETH0, ETH1, WLAN0, WLAN1. Network Manager doesn't pay any attention to, well, it does, but it doesn't really care what Linux calls the device. It uses its own ID, and that ID is assigned to that board. So if the hardware ID changes or the hardware interface name changes, Network Manager doesn't care, and it's still using the correct board. It's still going out the same wire. So yeah, you're all good there. But if you're using the older like Etsy network/interface, well, now you care because you've got to make sure that you don't have ENP2S0 in there as your device. That's what happened to me, and the network didn't come up. Well, I mean, these are on VMs, so I can go in through the console and fix that. But imagine if I had started with headless hardware. Yeah, I'd be scrambling for a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse. And once that was done, Devuan CLI came right up, no problem. And it was working but remember, these are all base installs. This does not have to do with anything that I do real world. But it gave me enough information to know, okay, so I know what to look for and I know what to look out for. And at this point, I said, well, I think I'm ready to migrate the hardware. So the hardware, I'm going to just pick 2 machines. One of them is the Devuan 5 that is running on hardware, and that's the Unbound server. The other one is a Debian 13 machine that is running on hardware that has to do with that display behind me. So yeah, a simple thing to test with. It's not, and if it breaks, yeah, okay, not a problem. I can live without that working for a while. So let's start with the hardware on the Devuan 5. I followed the steps. It migrated over to Devuan 6, booted it back up, and it's fine. It was working, no problem at all. Unbound came right up, was registered, and all that kind of stuff. Failed to ban came up, it worked, and then I got to Auditd. Auditd did not work. So what happened? Well, as it turns out, Devuan 5 being built on Debian 12 allows sloppy old code that talks to interfaces in the kernel that are gone, long gone. So, but it says, oh, it's okay if it doesn't work. It's okay. We'll just ignore that one and go on. But on Devuan 6, no. They enforce the rules. They do it properly. Yes, if the rules are sloppy and they aren't working, it goes stop. No, we're done here. Go fix your problem. So I haven't really done a whole lot with the audit rules for quite some time, and my network has changed since those were written. So I thought, well, maybe I should sit down and rewrite some new ones and start looking at the stuff that I actually run. And so that's what I did. I went through and redid that. I'm not going to share with you what I did, but I will tell you that if you want to set up your own, and the reason for that is my network is different from yours. It's not because, it's because I'm hiding this from you. No, it's not it. It's just I don't think it would help you. It'd probably cause you a lot more problems because you're not running the same things I am. However, I can point you to some sample areas that are on your disk that you can pull those in and take a look at and see if any of those apply to your network. And if they do, you can use them. And if they don't, just comment them out. There are also videos that you can watch on how to do Auditd rules. However, be careful with that. Don't get too old because you want to stay within about a year to 18 months on a video about that, because the footprint of the security frameworks today change over about every 12 to 18 months. At least in my experience, that's been true. It's a rule of thumb. I mean, it could be 5 months, it could be 6. So the next one was, but I didn't want to skip the Debian machine to migrate first. So I did that one right there. I started it up, and it looked like everything was working. And then I said, well, I think I better check, because fail to ban is kind of one of those notorious things that'll say, oh yeah, I'm working, it's fine. But then you dig in a little bit and you find that it didn't do any, the containers aren't actually receiving messages. So yeah, so you actually are not covered. It's not actually working. And that was the case. What was going on? Well, it turns out that during the process of standing this up, the it just migrated over the configurations for the container and left everything in there that was systemd related. And so what happened was when fail2ban started and it started to construct the containers, it went, wait a minute, I don't have systemd. This is breaking. So it would throw errors off into the log, but it never told the main thing that it was broken. Syscontrol was another one that actually was failing as well. So syscontrol is a way you can set variables on the kernel without having to compile the kernel. There's a lot of them that you can change. So I have a whole list of stuff that I turn on and turn off. And one of them was to disable IPv6. I don't use it at the moment. So I just disable it. Why have it running if you aren't using it? So, and in there it has a device ID for the network interfaces that you want to turn IPv6 off for. And they were the predictable names. So change that over. Those came up and worked. I didn't have any problems with unattended backup, and the only other thing was arpwatch. Arpwatch, for some reason, it didn't usually when you're doing an upgrade like that, it'll see the config file and it'll go, hey, I see this config file out here. Do you want me to use yours or replace it with the one that came with the package? But this config file is the one that sits in etc default. So this is the one that actually starts up the service. So it's a little bit different, but apparently it overlaid that with the default one, which the interfaces, there's a variable in there that says interfaces equals, and then you put in whatever interface you want the arpwatches to work on. So if you have two network ports that are open, you put both of them in there, and it's all good and wonderful. But by default, it's empty. And so arpwatch, if you start it with an empty interfaces, it goes crickets. It doesn't start because it doesn't know what to do. So I put in the interfaces, started up, and it was running. On the plus side, the one that worked was Ansible. I was thinking, I'm going to have to rewrite all this stuff because I've got stuff in there for Debian. I've got stuff in there for Fedora. I've got stuff in there for Arch. And so I'm going to have to rewrite the ones I'm going to have to take the Debians and rewrite them. But I thought, well, okay, let's see what has to be actually done. It worked. Everything worked. I could pass a brand new system to it, and it would harden it. It would go through all the hardening steps. So it was like, well, damn, that's good. That's good news. So that surprised me, and I was pretty happy to see that. There was one other one that was small and easy to fix. When I stood up lyniis, I used lyniis as one of the verification tools to check the level of hardening and grade the system accordingly. It was complaining that I didn't have a process accounting system up and running. And I always run systat, so I went and I checked systat. Sure enough, its default configuration had been overlaid as well. And so, yeah, it usually says enabled equal false. That's the default one, which means that it won't ever enable it for a startup. So I had to change that to enabled equal true, and then systat was able to come up and run. Then I usually, once it's up and running, I wait a few seconds, and then I'll type SAR minus capital A, and that will tell me, it'll at least show the header, and that means that the software is up and running and responding to the commands. I run CYVS. I wrote the tool to be able to do verification on what the status of the machine is from a standpoint of how vulnerable is it. It gives a count, and here's the count that I got. On Debian 13, I see 10 to 11 critical CVEs and about 150 to 180 high CVEs. Now that's on a base system. Those numbers will change depending upon which applications you install, because those applications may bring in CVEs with them. You see what I'm saying? Devuan on a base system has about one or two critical CVEs, and about 85 to maybe 90 of the high CVEs. A lot less than Debian 13 does. So I have two servers that run ZFS. I have a primary server and a backup server. I do ZFS replication between them. I post mostly it's to store my videos. I'm going to start on the backup server, and this is what I found. When I got I got everything done, all, put in all the patches for fail to ban and all that stuff. Rebooted the system, it came up, and it didn't mount. There was nothing there. And I'm like, wait a minute, it usually mounts on boot, so what's going on here? So I start digging into it. I look at the modules. They're in place. They're working. Okay, good. Rebuilt those for the new kernel, and the version of ZFS seems to be fine with it. So that's good. Did a fdisk -L, and there's no drives coming back in the pool. And the answer, the probe doesn't do anything. I remember the trick I used to use to get Thunderbolt to rework the drive probe that comes from the kernel. That worked, and then I put in my zpool import the ZME, and it was there, and everything was working. Whew, yeah. That's all I had. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you all again real soon. Bye for now.